Let's walk through the levels of structural organization. So this is how do we take small parts and pieces and hook them up together to make a whole human. And so I have listed on here, these are our levels of structural organization that we'll go through. And the way they're listed from 1 through 6 is truly from the simplest, or even we could say the smallest, to the most complex, which is going to be the biggest. So we're going to start at the chemical level and we're going to walk all the way up to the organismal level. Okay, so we're going to start here. We would say the chemical level is the simplest or the smallest level of organization. Atoms are going to combine to form molecules. Molecules combine to form organelles. So I want you to think at the chemical level. In your mind, I want you to think of that periodic table of elements. Okay? That's what we're talking about. So we're talking about things like hydrogen and nitrogen and carbon. These are all things that hook together to make, those are atoms, they hook together to make molecules. So like for example, C6H12O6. This is glucose, right? That's a molecule. We're hooking atoms up together to make that molecule. And then molecules combine to form organelles. Now, these are all concepts that you learned in general biology, right? So you should have talked about atoms and molecules. You talked about bonding. So how do you bond atoms together? You also talked about molecules, specifically macromolecules. These are big molecules. So these are going to be things like carbohydrates and lipids and proteins and nucleic acids. These are big molecules that combine to form organelles. And we know that organelles are essentially the building blocks of our cells. We have to have mitochondria, we have to have DNA inside a nucleus, we have ribosomes, we have a Golgi apparatus. So all of these macromolecules are creating these organelles, these components of our cells. Okay, so here's our chemical level. Now this level is not living, right? Glucose up here, this is not living. Water, H2O, that's not living. So the chemical level is not a living level. It's just the smallest or simplest level. This is where we're going to start. Now, once we connect things together and we start making organelles, if we get all those organelles together, now we make a cell. And a cell is the smallest unit of life. So even though it's not the smallest in terms of the level of structural organization, that's the chemical level, it is the smallest unit of life because this is where life begins. So cells are made of molecules, right? They're made of organelles. And the cells in our body are pretty amazing. We have billions of cells in the body, but all of our cells are going to vary in their size and their shape. And they vary a lot based on their function. And so remember in the last video at the beginning of chapter 1, we talked a lot about anatomy and physiology, structure and function, and how a lot of times we have that principle of complementarity. They're just kind of intertwined with each other. We see that principle of complementarity even at the cellular level. The size and shape of a cell is going to vary based on its function. So a great example of that, I have a few. One would be like neurons. Neurons look like smushed bugs to me. They have these little branchy processes and they usually have this one really long process. So that's the size and shape of a neuron. And the function of that neuron is that it sends signals. So it makes sense that it has this really long process here so that it can send a signal to another neuron or maybe into a muscle or into a gland. So it has these really long processes so it can reach other cells, right? Another example might be the cells, I'll draw them out. So that's an egg and that's a sperm. So the egg is actually the largest cell in the human body, and the sperm is the smallest cell in the human body. Obviously, these have relatively the same overarching function, right? They're both involved in reproduction. But if we think about the individual functions of these, when the egg gets released, it's pretty sedentary. It's just going to kind of hang out in the fallopian tube until it gets fertilized by a sperm. So the egg is pretty sedentary. It can be really big, whereas the sperm needs to be really tiny and really streamlined. And in fact, in the process of producing sperm, the sperm get rid of extra cytoplasm so they can be more streamlined, because their job is, once they're released, they've got to travel through that female reproductive system, through all the folds in there, and they've got to find their way out to the egg. And they are moving. And so these two cells, even though they're both involved in reproduction, their function is a little different. And so they look different. Okay, so in terms of the cellular level, they're always going to vary in size and shape based on function. So that's our smallest unit of life. Now, if we were to take a whole bunch of cells and hook them together, and they're all performing a similar function, we have our next level, which is the tissue level. Now, in our body, we have 4 different kinds of tissues. We have epithelial tissue. Epithelium is a covering or a lining. Okay, so it covers or lines. So think about that. Your skin covers your body. It's considered epithelial tissue. Lining the inside of your mouth, epithelial tissue. Lining the inside of your stomach, epithelial tissue. Okay, so if it's covering or lining something, it's epithelium. Now, we have lots of different kinds of epithelium, but that's just one category. Now, we also have muscle tissue. Muscle tissue contracts and you get a movement. Now, we actually have 3 kinds of muscle that we'll talk about this semester. One is the muscle that you think of, right? This is actually muscle that you have voluntary control over. Your brain tells it when to contract, and this is called skeletal muscle. That one's pretty easy to remember because it's connected to your skeleton. We also have our heart is a muscle, right? It's contracting, it's moving blood. We call that cardiac muscle. And then lastly, we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is the muscle that we find in all the hollow organs in our body. So a great example would be, I want you to think about what you ate for breakfast this morning, right? If you had a bowl of Cheerios. You chew your Cheerios, these are all skeletal muscles helping you chew, and then you swallow, and then you don't think about it again until it comes out the other end, right? So getting that food all the way through your digestive tract, which is a hollow organ, that's all smooth muscle, okay? And that's not anything you're thinking about. So the only one of these 3 muscles that you actually have conscious control over is skeletal muscle. You do not have conscious control over cardiac, your heart, or smooth muscle, lining those hollow organs. Our third type of tissue in the body is called connective tissue. This does exactly what it sounds like it does. It connects. It connects things together. It provides support and structure. Great examples of connective tissues would be things like tendons and ligaments. So we know that tendons connect our skeletal muscle to our skeleton. Ligaments connect one bone to another bone. So we have over 200 bones in the body. They have to get connected to each other. This is through ligaments. So connective tissue connects. And then lastly is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue, it has the ability to sense and respond to a stimulus. So you touch a hot stove, you jerk your hand away. You have nerves all within your skin so that you can feel when something is hot and you can respond appropriately to that. Okay, so these are our 4 different types of tissues that we have. Now, if we take tissues, different kinds of tissues, and hook them up together, we get an organ. Now, in order for something to be an organ, you have to have at least 2 different kinds of tissues in there, right? Because one tissue would just be a tissue. So you got to have at least two different tissues for something to be classified as an organ. However, most of our organs have all four kinds of tissues. I want you to think about your stomach, for example. That's an organ, okay? What kind of tissue would line the inside of your stomach? A covering or a lining. That's epithelial tissue. Okay, so lining the inside of your stomach is epithelium. Can your stomach move and contract and churn that food? Yes, it can. What would that be? Muscle. Smooth muscle specifically, right? It's not anything that we're thinking about, and it's in a hollow organ. We also have connective tissue holding the stomach in place and holding it where it should be. And then can you feel your stomach? As in, like, can you tell when you're really full, or can you tell when you're hungry? Yes, that would be nervous tissue. So right there with that organ, we've got all four kinds of tissues. They're showing you here in this picture, they're showing you a blood vessel. So blood vessels are considered organs. And we can do the same thing here. You can see in yellow, lining the inside of this blood vessel is epithelial tissue. Blood vessels have the ability to constrict, okay, and get smaller, or dilate and get bigger. So that's a muscle. So that's smooth muscle. And then you also have connective tissue in there. So there's three different kinds of tissues in our blood vessels. So in order for something to be an organ, it has to have at least two tissues. Now, if we take organs and hook them together so that they're working towards a common function, we have an organ system, okay? Now, in our body, we have 11 different organ systems. So what I'd like to do is walk you through those 11 organ systems. Now, your textbook does a great job with the levels of structural organization. In fact, your chapters are laid out this way. So chapter 1, which is what we're in, is sort of an introductory chapter. Chapter 2 is chemistry. Chapter 3 is cells. Chapter 4 is tissues. And then chapter 5, we start getting into our organ systems. Okay, we don't have a chapter with just organs. Instead, we go into organ systems. So your chapter, Anatomy and Physiology textbooks, typically walk you through the levels of structural organization. So let's walk through our 11 organ systems. Okay, these are actually in the order that we're going to cover them this semester as well. So the first organ system we'll get to is the integumentary system. This is essentially your body's covering. So this is anything on the outside of your body. So your skin, your hair, your nails, your sweat glands, your oil glands, all of these are part of the integument system. Now the job of your integument system is truly to keep the inside in and the outside out. But also it's very protective. The tissue in your skin is nice and thick, so it's very protective. And it prevents injuries, it prevents things from piercing into your body, and it also makes vitamin D. I want you to think about what you have to have for your skin to make vitamin D. You've got to have the sun, right? So when you go out in the sun, your skin has the ability to create vitamin D. And what do you need vitamin D for? You need vitamin D so that you can absorb, calcium. So you have to have vitamin D so that you can absorb calcium from the food that you eat. And what do we need calcium for? A lot of people say bones. You need calcium for your bones. That is really not the right answer. You actually need calcium for every single physiological function that happens in your body. You need calcium for your glands to secrete. You need calcium for cells to divide. You need calcium for muscles to contract. You need calcium for your nerves to fire. You need calcium for everything. So calcium is incredibly important in our bodies, okay? Now the next organ system, after we talk about the skin, we'll talk about our skeletal system. We'll talk about bones. So your skeletal system is essentially the bones of the body. We have over 200 of those. But it also is going to include the cartilage that we find in the body. We have a lot of cartilage that's up in our rib cage called our costal cartilage. And we'll also talk about ligaments. Remember, ligaments connect one bone to another bone. And the big function of your skeletal system is that not only is it protective, right? I want you to think about you have bony protection around really vital organs, right? Think of your brain. It is housed within what we call the cranial cavity. So you have cranial bones all around your brain protecting it. Same thing with your spinal cord. Your heart and your lungs are housed within that rib cage. So your bones are very protective. They also provide you with sort of a framework and support. They support your body organs, and they provide you with sort of a stature or a structure. If you didn't have bones, you'd be a big puddle of skin and organs on the floor, right? So you got to have a framework. Think of the scaffolding of a house. Another thing that your bones do that people don't realize is that your bones produce blood cells. When I say blood cells, I mean all kinds of blood cells, red blood cells and white blood cells. Your bones are hollow. They're hollow for a couple of reasons. One, it makes your skeleton lighter and it's easier to lug around. But the other is because they're hollow, you have a place to store stuff. And what you store inside your hollow bones is something called red bone marrow. And this is where all of your blood cells are formed. Okay, so your bones are a site of blood cell formation, okay, because your red bone marrow is inside your bones. And then lastly, your bones store minerals, namely calcium. Okay, so I just told you, we just talked about, if I skip back here, we just talked about how important calcium is for everything. Your bones can store it. So a lot of times what will happen is, let's say you have extra calcium. So let's say that your diet is really good, you get plenty of vitamin D, you're eating foods that are rich in calcium, and your body is absorbing this calcium. Anytime you have extra that you don't need to use in any kind of physiological function, your body goes, yes, I got extra, let me store this for later, just in case I need it later. And where you're going to store it is in your bones. And we know that calcium in the bones, it makes your bones nice and hard and strong. That also means, though, that down the road, if there's ever a time where you're not absorbing as much calcium, maybe you're deficient in vitamin D and you can't absorb calcium from your foods, or maybe you're not eating a good diet and you're not getting enough calcium, your body goes, oh man, I need calcium and I need it now for all those functions that we talked about. Where's it going to get the calcium from? Your bones. Your bones are a place to store the calcium. So if the amount of calcium in your blood ever gets low, your body needs it. Needs it for physiological functions, and it's going to pull it out of your bones. It will leach the calcium from your bones so that you can continue to go through these physiological functions. Now the downside of that is when you pull calcium out of your bones get more brittle. Okay? We are also this semester going to go through the muscular system. So the muscular system is basically all of the muscles that are attached to your skeleton. So when we talk about the muscular system, we're really focused on skeletal muscles. We are really not going to talk much about cardiac muscle or even smooth muscle. We'll touch on them, but that's really not the focus when we talk about the muscular system. It's really these skeletal muscles. Now, the main function of your skeletal muscles is movement. It provides you with movement, being able to move around in your environment. Also, facial expression, right? I'm really bad at hiding my facial expressions, and we know facial expressions can say a lot. When my son was really little, everybody, I feel like once you have a child, you learn the look, like you know how to give the look. And I would give our son the look if he was doing something naughty. And he would look at me and go, "Are you unhappy, Mommy? Are you unhappy? And so he could tell that I was not happy with what he was doing. So you can say a lot with facial expression without ever having to vocalize anything. Also, your skeletal muscles allow you to maintain a posture. So, posture not only means being able to sit up straight, but it also means that you can sit in a chair upright against gravity without getting exhausted or falling over. You can stand up without getting exhausted or falling over with gravity. And then also, your skeletal muscles produce a lot of body heat. We know this. If you go to the gym and work out, you're going to get hot and you're going to start sweating because the more you move those muscles, the more heat they generate. Okay, so they really do help to generate that body heat. Our next organ system that we'll cover is going to be the nervous system. So this is basically the brain and spinal cord and all the nerves that come off the brain and spinal cord. And the main function here is to sense and respond to a stimulus. So you touch a hot stove, you jerk your hand away, right? We also have the endocrine system. Now, we actually, when we talk about glands this semester, when we talk about skin, the integument system, we get into sweat glands. We actually have different kinds of glands. We have endocrine and exocrine. Exocrine would be like sweat glands and oil glands. I want you to think of that prefix exo. It means outside. You're secreting to the surface. So an endocrine gland, endo, means inside. So these are glands that are inside your body and they're releasing their products directly into your bloodstream. Typically, when we think of the endocrine system, we think of hormones. So the endocrine system is composed of glands all over the body. So as we go over them, I'm going to circle them over here. So we have things like the pineal gland, which is up in the brain, the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, the pituitary gland, which is also in the brain, the thyroid gland, which is up in the neck, it's around your larynx, your voice box, the thymus gland, which is a gland that sits right on top of your heart, and the pancreas. The pancreas is sort of sandwiched right there in the first part of your small intestine. And again, all of these glands are really important in regulating things like growth, reproduction, metabolism. So all of these are part of the endocrine system. Now we'll also get into the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system is your heart and all of the blood vessels. So your heart, its job is the muscular pump. It's pumping the blood and the vessels are like the highway. They're moving the blood where it needs to go throughout the body. Now I would say if I listed all 11 organ systems, you could tell me what all 11 do, but most people get confused when they get to this one, the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is essentially a series of vessels throughout the body, and their job is to pick up extra fluid that gets leaked out of the blood vessels, and it returns that fluid back into your bloodstream. And this is really important. It actually prevents swelling in different parts of your body. So your lymphatic system is composed of things like your red bone marrow. Remember, that's found inside the hollow space inside your bone. Your thymus gland, which sits on top of the heart. The spleen, which is an organ down by the stomach. The lymph nodes, right? We know where lymph nodes are, like in the armpits. We have lymph nodes up in the neck and down in the groin. And then all those green vessels that are connecting those lymph nodes together. Now, another thing that your lymphatic system does, other than picking up the leaked fluid, is that it is also incredibly important in your immune system. It actually houses a type of white blood cell called a lymphocyte, right? Lymphatic lymphocyte. Cyte means cell. These are a really important type of white blood cell that's great at fighting infections. Now our respiratory system, this is basically how you get oxygen into your bloodstream and how you can get rid of CO2, which is a waste. And this is composed, if we follow our nose, all the way down into our lungs. So it's composed of the nose, the nasal cavity, The pharynx is basically just the back of your throat. Your trachea, the bronchi are all those little branches that branch out and go into the lungs. And again, its job really is to get oxygen into your blood and CO2 out. We'll also walk through the digestive system. The digestive system is how we are able to break food down into small parts and pieces that can get absorbed into our bloodstream. Okay, and anything we can't break down, we will get rid of, and it'll be removed from our body as feces. Our body is not big enough to hold on to stuff we don't need. So the digestive system, we can truly follow it in one end and out the other. So food goes in through the mouth, the oral cavity, down the esophagus, into the stomach. From there, it's going to go in through the small intestine, and then through the large intestine, which we also sometimes call the colon, and then out through the rectum and the anus. Okay, now the only organ that's not in this pathway that I talked about is the liver. So the liver is also a really important part of your digestive system. It actually helps you break down fat. We'll also cover the urinary system. The urinary system helps to filter out the toxins that are in your bloodstream. The type of toxins that typically are in our bloodstream are called nitrogenous wastes. This basically is just any waste with nitrogen in it. Your urinary system is made of your kidneys. The ureters are the tubes that run from the kidneys down to the bladder. The bladder is just a temporary storage tank for urine, and when you are ready to void your bladder, urine will come out through the urethra. Now, not only do your kidneys get rid of waste, but they also help to regulate water balance. So on days where you have not had enough to drink in terms of water, you're going to notice that you do not urinate nearly as much. And when you do urinate, it's going to be very dark in color and it's going to smell like urine. Whereas on days where you're drinking a ton of water, you're going to urinate frequently and your urine will be very clear in color. Now, your kidneys are also balancing pH of your bloodstream and also electrolytes. And then the last organ systems we'll cover are the reproductive systems. The male reproductive system, its main function is to produce offspring. And the female reproductive system actually has more than that in terms of function. It is not only to produce offspring, but also to house and nourish the developing fetus before it's born, and then also nourish that baby after it's born. So those are our 11 organ systems. We are still in these levels of structural organization. Now, if we take all 11 organ systems and hook them up together, we now have that last level, which is the biggest, that is the organismal level. It is all structures working together to sustain life. Okay, so we have walked through our levels of organization from the smallest or simplest, which is the chemical level. If we hook atoms and molecules together, then we can make organelles. If we put all those organelles together, we get our second level, which is the cellular level, the smallest unit of life. Cells working together make tissues. Tissues working together make organs. Organs make organ systems. We have 11 of those, and all 11 of those make the organismal level. Now, the last thing I want to mention is just how your organ systems are working together to make sure that you are healthy. And this is a great picture showing you how well your organ systems are doing this job. So you can see here, this is not all 11 organ systems, it's only 4. But what you see is the digestive system here. Okay, so you can see food coming in. And then you can see how these different organ systems, just these 4, are so intertwined and connected together. So you can see when food comes in, remember you're going to break it down into small parts and pieces, and you're going to pull nutrients out of your food and you're going to put them in your cardiovascular system. Right? Now those nutrients are moving through your bloodstream. But we also know our cardiovascular system is intimately linked to our respiratory system. This is how we're putting oxygen into our blood and getting rid of CO2. We also know that the cardiovascular system is intimately linked with the urinary system. This is how we're getting rid of wastes. The reason I'm showing you this is because a lot of times what you'll find is that if one organ system fails, other organ systems will also start failing. And the reason is right here. They are all intimately connected together. So if one goes down, a lot of times it's just not long before the next organ system starts to fail as well. Okay? They work together.